but when you walked in that dressing room, then you were brothers. And whenever we'd play teams that you had a brother on, you talked to them the night before, but you didn't talk to them again until after the game. And it was because you were in the dressing room with your brothers, so to speak. And that's the demeanor we had internally with the Islander team. At the end of the day, it was just the belief we had in each other and the trust we had in each other. And you knew the guy beside you in the dressing room had your back all the time.
That was Duane Sutter, 4-time Stanley Cup champion as a member of one of hockey's greatest ever teams, the New York Islanders. And you are listening to the Up My Hockey Podcast with Jason Padola. Just watch me now. Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Padola, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Padola, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back to the Up My Hockey Podcast with Jason Padola. You are here for episode 100, the century mark of the Up My Hockey Podcast. Kind of crazy even to reflect a little bit on what 100 means. I know it's just a number, but it does mean that we've been at this thing for quite a while now. And I'm proud to say that we're still here after 100 episodes, and definitely been contemplating on how to address the 100 mark, the 100 episodes. And I think I will probably do my own personal reflection on the episodes and maybe my most memorable conversations, and maybe point out why they were special to me, and maybe for some of you newer listeners might give you a little bit of direction to look backwards. I definitely suggest catching up. Yeah, I mean you'll see the growth of the podcast and just in the discussions. But there are some amazing guests from back to 3 years ago. And as you know, if you have listened to any of the episodes, that the conversations are as relevant today as they were when they were had 2 or 3 years ago. The lessons and the gold nuggets of inspiration or motivation are still there. So I do believe that I'm going to be looking backwards and reflecting on the past 2.5, 3 years or whatever it's been since I started this. I'm not a guy that's good with dates, but boy, 100 is the century mark. And for today on the century mark, we really couldn't have a better guest. A former coach of mine with the Florida Panthers. He was an assistant coach there in 1996 and 1997. Mr. Duane Sutter, who himself was an outstanding player. 730 games in the NHL. He was a 17th overall draft pick to the New York Islanders. Went straight from junior hockey to the big show, and never looked back. He never played a day in the AHL. And boy, what a team did he step into there. It was a team that had success the previous season, but didn't quite get to where they wanted to get to. And then Duane showed up on the scene along with some others, and the New York Islanders went on to win 19 consecutive playoff series, meaning 4 consecutive Stanley Cups and a finals appearance in the fifth crack at it. And and Duane was there for it all. As far as the Sutter name, the Sutter name back when I was growing up was super relevant because they were all in the NHL. There was 6 brothers in the NHL at the same time, which is unfathomable, really. I mean, the closest thing we have now will be the Hughes brothers. It looks like there'll probably be 3 of them in the NHL at the same time. And I mean, what a feat that is for one family. But for a family from Viking, Alberta, whatever the population is there, but we're talking 4 digits, not 5, for 6 of the 7 brothers to play. And footnote on that, apparently the 7th brother, which we cover here in this interview, might have been the best player of them all. He was the oldest and just chose to stay on the farm. So 6 out of 7, could have been 7 out of 7 playing the NHL is really almost incomprehensible. And they were all top picks except for one. The combined Sutter family ended up playing close to 5,000 games in the NHL. Many went on to GM positions or to coaching positions like Duane did. So I wanted to revisit that because for me, being 47 years old, we knew the Sutters, and I know the Sutters. But for some of these younger players now, I mean, they might know Daryl, who's the head coach in Calgary, and that might be a name that's relevant because he's obviously still relevant. But it's tough to look back and know all of the history of the game. So I thought this would be an amazing opportunity to celebrate the Sutters again, to talk about their upbringing and their story and what the secret recipe was for their success as a family to show up at the NHL level and to be as successful as they were. Duane, getting back to Duane on a personal level, just a super gentleman. He's soft-spoken, but he was tough when he needed to be, especially on the ice. But I knew him more in the coaching capacity, and he was always someone to put his arm around you. He was also someone that would kick you in the butt, but he would never ever flash his credentials or throw his resume in your face. He kept quiet about his all the great things that he accomplished in his career, and he just let players come to them, and he would approach them as he felt that they needed to be approached. And I think that his personality comes through in this interview. We talk about how we came in contact again, and that was at an Islanders alumni weekend. And shout out to the New York Islanders. What a fantastic ownership group there since they've taken over. They've really embraced the history of what the Islanders are, and all the all the things that they've accomplished. And one of the things that they've said is whether you've played one game or 1,000 games, you're a part of the Islander family. And they're one of the few teams in the NHL that I know of, maybe the only one, that has an annual alumni weekend where if you played a game for them, you are invited to show up in New York, and they're going to take care of you for essentially 48 hours. And they take you to a game and into the suite, and red carpet rolls out, and they just absolutely celebrate the history of the team, and it gives all us old guys an opportunity to tell stories and get together. And I'm joking about me being an old guy, but there's the guys there that are much older than me that played back in the 70s, and it's really awesome to have all those generations cross paths in one spot and one special weekend of the year. So that's where Duane and I got into contact with each other again. And Duane, like I said, the gentleman that he was, I had my middle son there with me. It's kind of a family trip that we've planned all the time. We take one of our boys each year has been the plan, and so Duane took the time, in front of my son, to introduce himself and to say to Gunnar, that I was a really special player, and that he should be really proud of his dad, and that I just didn't get an opportunity. And I'm just sharing that with you here is just because, one, it was nice to hear from me, but it was also just super gracious of him to take the time to say that to my 12-year-old son, who I'm sure it's going to be an impactful comment for him for years. So I think that just speaks to who he is and what he's all about, to kind of understand, that side of the game. And you know what I'm all about here at Up My Hockey. It really is about developing, the holistic idea of the player and really shining a light on the interpersonal skills and the way to be around people, right? To be able to have an impact on people, to not only just show up the way you should show up, whether it be to a practice or to a tryout or in a team environment, but even outside of the rink, like for Mr. Duane Sutter in a hotel lobby, to take the time to introduce himself to a 12-year-old boy and to say something as kind as he did to him. So kudos to Duane. He really, I think his character and his personality shines through here in this interview. And, another thing, I texted him the day before. I said, hey, I need a guest for Thursday. Would you like to come on? And, he jumped right on. Yeah, afternoon would be great. So, just really easy to get in hold of, was really willing to help me out and to come on the podcast. So, Duane, if you are listening, thanks so much for being a part of it. I really do appreciate your time. And I know that your story is definitely worth telling and worth celebrating. So for those of you listening right now, you're in for a treat for episode 100. Couldn't have a better name to headline the 100th episode. My former coach and a player of 731 regular season games and another 161 playoff games, and the winner of 4 Stanley Cups, Mr. Duane Sutter. Enjoy the conversation. Here we are with my old coach of my first NHL team and a 4-time Cup champion himself, and been around the game forever, Mr. Duane Sutter. Thank you so much for being here on Up My Hockey.
Thank you, Pods. Great to visit with you.
Yeah, I was just for those that don't know, and I might have mentioned it in the intro, but we just came across paths again at the Islanders Alumni Weekend, and it was awesome just to see not only Duane, but legends from the past and players that I played with before, and just in an environment that kind of makes you feel like an NHLer again, doesn't it, Duane? It's pretty awesome the way they put that on there.
You know what? It was all first class, and a great credit to the ownership of the Islanders. What they've done since they bought the team a few years ago is simply remarkable. By bringing their alumni back in the group, and just the memories that come up, and the people that you cross paths with that were important people of the journey. So it was simply remarkable, and nice to see you guys again too.
Yeah, no, it's so fun, and I love bringing the different generations together. Like it's having those conversations with guys that you never played with from different eras. I think there's value there for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's something that I really enjoyed. Really special event for my family to put that on the calendar and to come up. And the funny, like the irony is which I'm sure you saw, but the listeners didn't. So we got jerseys this year. Like every year they give you something different. And this year we all got our own jersey with our number on it and our name. And embroidered on the sleeve was how many games you played with the Islanders. And so anyways, I was talking with Trotche there at one point. I think he had 1,100 games or something with the Islanders, essentially his whole career. And I looked down on my sleeve and I had one. So it was my last game ever in the NHL, and it was one game with the Islanders. But that's like how special it is for them, because they say, that is actually kind of the slogan. Whether you played one game or 1,000 games, you're a part of the Islanders family, and they really did treat us all one and the same.
Yeah, and you had some really special seats right down at ice level behind the goalie. Awesome.
Yeah, that was super cool. They brought my wife and I down, and my son, who's a goalie, and who had the jerseys, the Sorokin jersey on, right behind Sorokin, like 6 feet away. So that was really cool to watch a period from that perspective.
Yeah. Always special to see how your kids respond to something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It was totally fun. So anyways, this is episode 100 though, by the way, Duane. I never told you that. So this is 100 episodes. You are my century mark, and what a cool guest to have on. So thanks so much for being here, and yeah, kind of a landmark episode for the podcast. It's been going since pre-COVID and kind of stops and starts here and there, but I've definitely been more consistent and more dedicated to it. It's been a great platform, and been getting a lot of great responses just by how it's kind of made a difference in people's careers. So I'd love to get into you and your career and your family, because I know there's going to be so many good stories to share with your upbringing and everything else. Pardon me?
Do I have to tell the truth?
Only if we want to. Sometimes a little fable might be okay too. But yeah, I said before we got on, so the Sutter name, it's still very entrenched in hockey with your brother coaching the Flames, and another brother involved in junior hockey with the Rebels, and the history with the NHL that you all had. But I think this younger generation isn't quite as familiar with the actual legacy of the Sutter name, with 7 brothers and 6 playing in the NHL, and from this small community called Viking in Alberta. And I just wouldn't mind walking back down memory lane. I know you've probably told the story 100 times, but what was that like for you guys on the farm growing up, and having all the brothers, and playing hockey, and just give us a day in the life of the Sutter family back when you guys were minor hockey players.
Well, it was a small town of just under 1,200 people, and our farm, we were 8 miles outside of town. So a typical school day would have been walking 100 or so yards from the house out to the road to catch a school bus, and usually at least 1 or 2 fights through those 100 yards. And if it was winter time, you'd carry your equipment out and leave it on the bus during school at the front of the school bus with the driver, and after school, you'd grab your equipment and walk the 1 block down to to the hockey rink, and that's where we played, right there in town. There was also a lot of memories out on the slough, all of us playing with neighbor boys, and then we had a dairy barn, so we had a big hayloft. So in the summertime, that's where we played, up in the hayloft, and a lot of fights up there, a lot of bloody noses and scraped knuckles. But all in all, growing up on the farm, mom and dad really laid the work ethic. We all had our own duties, and that's where we learned how to work. And at the end of the day, yeah, we had a little bit of talent, but nothing that would have been worthwhile having if we didn't have the work ethic. So that's where it came from, right from mom and dad.
So that farm life and being farm tough, like I've said that before because I've experienced, not personally, but like playing with guys, that had that upbringing, and it's like a strength that's not gym born. I find, like, it's just there's a different level of that, and it is working with your hands, I think, and being around and doing jobs hourly, daily for years, that provides that. Like, what were some of the jobs, like, with you having so many brothers? Like, what would be some of the things that you said you guys were assigned to do that would be part of your obligations, or something you had to be accountable for during the day?
Well, in the summertime, mom had a massive garden, so we all had to take our turns weeding and hilling potatoes, and then we had the livestock, so you're feeding cattle, chickens, pigs. We had it all. It was a mixed farm, and then in the fall, obviously with harvest, in those years it was a small square bale, so that was a job that we all enjoyed because you knew it was making you stronger, and it was right before the hockey season started. As a kid, once we all turned pro, it was a little different story. And as you know, the fitness levels and the training ability or services that all the kids have access to today, we didn't have that growing up on a farm. So, like, I remember in junior, and now they talk about plyometrics, but in junior, when the crops were swathed and we were on a pretty hilly piece of 640 acres, I used to run half mile from fence line to fence line, jumping the swaths. And that was part of my training for 2 or 3 years. Little did I know it was, like plyometrics or what some guys are doing today in a little different setting.
Right.
But obviously it paid some dividends.
That's awesome. You mentioned, first of all, how that's one thing I didn't look up. So with your brothers, what's the age gap between oldest to youngest? How many years is it?
Mom had a tough few years when she had 7 boys in 9 years.
Holy smokes.
So
7 boys.
and the twins were the last, and that finished her off. She didn't care to have any more after that.
And no sisters? Was it just brothers?
Just brothers, 7 boys. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the 200 yards to the bus stop, and there'd be a couple fights in there. I assume you're exaggerating. That wouldn't be a daily thing, but I would also assume that there was one or two. Was that just unavoidable with having boys, do you think, or was there a competitive nature in you guys from a young age that just existed where maybe it wouldn't in others?
Well, once you got out of the house and you could really say a few things that you wouldn't say in front of mom, then obviously it created some hard feelings or pissed somebody off. But and then if we were out to the road early, on the corner post of the fence, we had an old Rogers syrup can, tin can. We'd set that up on top of the fence post, and we'd stand there and throw rocks, whoever could knock it off, right?
Yeah.
And so occasionally somebody had to go up and put that can back on the post. Well, if you weren't getting along with them that day, they might get a couple of rocks chucked at them too. So there was always something going on. Either you're arguing and fighting over that, or arguing about hockey or ball or girlfriends or whatever it might be. It happened. I wouldn't say every day, but I'd say once a week for sure.
Did you within that group, did you have your nemesis, like somebody that you were battling with more so than others?
You know what? I was the middle child, 3 older, 3 younger, so I could go either way. with that. Depends on the day, right? So I wouldn't say no, not one of them in particular, but being the middle child, I had a little bit of I'd call it an advantage.
Right. That's awesome. I got to ask it. Is there somebody that takes the title as being the toughest, the guy you didn't want to mess with?
Brian was certainly the toughest for sure. He just I don't know. Even in the NHL, right, pound for pound, he was one of the toughest guys who's ever played the game. So, um, and we all did our share of fighting in hockey, as you know. But certainly, we learned a lot of it on the farm or growing up, or in a small town. In those years, there wasn't the fear with classmates or schoolmates like there is now in school. But I mean, you just went out behind the school bus and settled it, and
Right.
that's how it was. That's what we grew up with.
Does that at what point were you able to concede that title to Brian? You seem to see it without too much pain in your eyes to give him that title. You couldn't have done that at 15 or 14, though, I wouldn't imagine.
No, I think he had it pretty much the whole time. As far back as I can remember.
That's awesome. I did read someplace that your oldest brother, Gary, and I can't remember who said it, the one that never played in the NHL, and I believe he was the oldest. I think
Yeah.
Rich might have said that he was the best hockey player. Is that something that you would like give testament to?
He was a really good player. Him and Brian left or played it in Vegreville, Alberta, in the Central Alberta Junior B League. The year before Brian went to Red Deer, so Brian would have been 15, Gary 16, and he was a defenseman or a winger. He played with a little nastiness to him. Wasn't quite as big as Brian, but his skills were a little more developed than all of ours. And fortunately, once he played junior B there, he decided he wasn't ready to leave home, and Brian got the opportunity the following year and went away and made the Red Deer Wrestlers.
Right. So it was a choice essentially, right? That he decided to play in the farm and
Yeah.
so be it.
Yeah.
And so wow, that's pretty wild though too. Like I mean, who knows how it would have been for him and his journey, but like even to add another one potentially to the list of the Sutters to have 7. Like what was the secret sauce? Like there had to be something there. You know, I mean, other than well, I guess there's the internal compete level and the internal competitive spirit that obviously existed, and you guys were pushing each other collectively. But holy smokes, like that doesn't mean you should all just make the NHL or the best league in the world. Like, is there something else going on there?
I can't really say, Jason, what it would have been. I mean, I know growing up, right, when you got that many, your parents didn't have the money to afford new equipment, new skates, and so on. Once Brian opened that door and made it with his passion and great work ethic, and then he started to score some goals and all that. Like we made homemade shooting boards and stuff like that, and spent more time shooting pucks than anything else of the hockey skills. But once we got into the junior teams and they bought you skates, our skating improved right away because we were going from skates 2 or 3 sizes too big for you and with no support to a skate that fits you. So, and then once you made that step, then you continue to work at it, and you never took a night or a practice off.
And that's obviously, those are the habits, and I mean, boy, habits can serve us very well, or they can be our detriment too. So I mean, you develop those good habits, and that translates into other things. And you mentioned that Brian had that work ethic, which I mean, sounds like you guys all had. But I mean, having somebody in that leadership position that you can look up to, that see that they're making the best of their opportunity, are able to do it, must have allowed the belief in everyone else and the example to make an impact.
Yeah, confidence is such a strange thing too, right? Like once you get into the circle, and if your confidence is growing day by day, obviously it's going to push you to higher limits. So, and just watching him when he moved away, and then, as you know, growing up, everybody wants to win the Stanley Cup, and as little boys, you're always playing to win the Stanley Cup. But once Brian made the junior jump and the Red Deer, and then on to Lethbridge, and then was drafted, it gave us all a big boost. So, and eventually, yes, it opened the first door, but after that, you had to earn your own way, right? So,
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of people overlook. There's times when you hear, well, the younger ones made it because Brian made it, and so on all the way down the line. But at the end of the day, yeah, you got the first look, but after that, you had to do it yourself.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Did you guys, so with 7 and 9 years, there was lots of crossover as far as like, especially the junior years, like a lot of guys played junior for, 3 to 4 years before they turned pro. Uh, did you get a chance to play with any of your brothers at the junior level?
My first year when I went into Red Deer as a 16-year-old, Daryl had been there for 1 year. And then he graduated to Lethbridge after that year. And Brent came in as a 15-year-old. So I played with Daryl and Brent in Red Deer, and then didn't play with another one until Brent joined the Islanders.
Right. And was that the only brother you had on your team in the NHL?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When I
Uh,
got traded to Chicago, Daryl was just starting his coaching career, and he was an assistant coach with the Blackhawks at the time.
oh, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, yeah. He was learning and the ropes, and as it turned out, he went. Obviously, everybody knows he's gone on to quite a career coaching. So it was a big learning curve for him, but we were close. He was probably my closest brother at the time, I would say. So, and then our wives are real close, so it was really neat to cross paths with them again. And our kids were just tiny then, so it was special for them too.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and what a great career he has with the Cups and everything else, all the success that he's had. Yeah, super cool. I mean, I'm just looking through 17th, 20th, 179th, 17th, 10th, and 4th. Those are the selections of all you guys. And so, with the exception of Daryl, who went 179, everyone in this day and age would consider be a first round selection, which is also super, super cool. Almost 5,000 games combined. It's really a cool story and one that makes me smile in disbelief. I got 3 boys now. I can't remember if I told you that when we were chatting over the weekend. And we don't live on a farm. We live at Predator Ridge Resort. There's nothing similar in the upbringing between yourselves and the Podolin boys. However, I do try and parent with a little bit of let's say a long rope, so allow. It's not like I have to break up every first fight as soon as it starts, right? Like I've been a little bit allowing them to try and figure it out and figure out
Right.
not only their personal space, but how to navigate that competitiveness and, all that stuff. I think it's important, especially for boys and even like aspiring hockey boys. I think that it's kind of an advantage for them if you let them figure it out on their own. Is that something that you would have imparted in your own family, like the ability to, go figure it out? I don't need to be involved in everything that's going on.
I think that we raised our 3 children that way. 2 girls and a boy. Obviously, they're very competitive kids and have worked very hard to get where they're at today. But growing up, you know what, Jason, I was gone a lot as a player and as a coach. Probably didn't spend the time. I know I didn't spend the time that I probably should have been with the kids, but you're trying to push your career along, and at the end of the day, you're doing it for them. So I would give credit to my wife Cindy more so than myself for putting her foot down and doing the right things and making them mine.
Right. Yeah, no, fair enough. I just find it interesting because like my wife and I have because my wife had a sister, didn't have any brothers, and she was a professional dancer and an actress. So very athletic and competitive in her own right, but not in like a physical component style, right, of
Right.
way. So like for her to be exposed to not only me, but the 3 boys and what 3 boys, and they're 40 months apart, like front to back, right?
Wow.
So we were busy too there in the younger years, and they're so close enough that that there is that sibling rivalry there. It's not like there's somebody that's 18 and the other one's 10, right?
Right.
Like they have the same interests and they're trying to prove each other and one up each other. And so she had a real hard time at times with like the things that would be going on in the basement. And she would just have to remove herself. She's like, I do not get boys. I do not get
Yeah.
it.
And thankfully, my wife is a very athletic girl and has been since we've known each other when we were children. So that certainly helped. She was able to play every sport with them, help them along through difficult times, or just to develop skills. It was pretty special to have her like that, and then the kids really admired her for that.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned playing. I mean, I've sort of reflected on my own career because I didn't meet my wife until 30, 31, and I was retired. Like, I wasn't playing hockey at the time, right? So we've had uh, our boys, and bringing up the boys. I've kind of chosen careers that I can be around, and I'm with them, and I'm keeping them a part of my day and my business, and by choice. But then I look back kind of on my playing career, and the guys that had families, they have the reflection of, like, like they're gone a lot, right? And there was a lot they had to dedicate, and they couldn't be there for them. But the family and that ability to have family and something to come home to actually really helped them in their career as well, right? Because there was like more meaning to it. Whereas I was single my whole career, and it was only me, and there was nothing to ground yourself to that home base. So I think that there's advantages and disadvantages of both, like starting a family young or not.
I think in one respect, it has never changed, and probably even into today. But a lesson I learned from both Al Arbor and Mike Keenan as head coaches was your family time during the season is quality, not quantity. And in the summer, then you got to balance that out more in the off season, right? So it was a really important, I wouldn't say lesson, but important advice from both of those people as coaches.
Yeah, because you do need to find a balance there, right? And understand.
Yeah.
And and the family needs to understand too, right? I mean, of course, like what it takes to be a professional athlete is a lot, and there's going to be some sacrifice. But if you can balance that, like you say, with the quantity aspect, and make sure you make those moments count, I think it can work for sure.
Yeah, it was always quality over quantity during the season.
Just going to take a short break here from the podcast and break to the testimonials who that have been coming in. And as I usually do, or try to do, give my listeners a reminder to press that review button on the Apple Podcast option. Because, again, I looked at the stats again the other day. It's like 70 to 80% of my listeners are listening on an Apple device, listening on an iPhone. So that means you're listening on an Apple, like probably an iTunes link, and you are able to review on iTunes. So if you are one of those people that haven't, again, a gentle shove to say, hey, press on the button, put 5 stars, and tell us what you think about the podcast. That would be fantastic. And I want to celebrate that by reading a couple that have been coming in, and just recognize people who are contributing, and recognize what's being said about the podcast. And one came in from WW2374 via Apple Podcasts in Canada, and the title is "A Must Listen for Aspiring Players and Parents, 5 stars. This podcast has everything aspiring players and parents are looking for. A host that is engaging and shares their view about hockey from experience. Entertaining and relevant guests, explores the mental side of hockey, and educational for parents and players navigating the hockey experience." So thanks so much to WW2374. Love hearing that. One more I'll read out quickly here is "Love listening, 5 stars" from Buffy Puck via Apple Podcasts in the United States. Thank you so much, by the way, for all you people listening in the States. I spent a ton of my career down in the States, and my wife is from the States, and all my boys are dual citizens. So although I am up in Western Canada, and some of our guests are obviously Western Canadians, just because of where I grew up playing hockey, I really appreciate the podcast being spread amongst my American friends. So thanks so much for this review, Buffy Puck. And Buffy Puck says, "I enjoy this podcast and the insight to all levels of hockey. It seems all hockey journeys are hard, but the grueling process creates some pretty amazing people. Jason does a great job highlighting his guests and their character as much as their hockey careers." So fantastic stuff. I really appreciate those coming in. As I've said before, you'd be surprised at what a difference the reviews will make, and the ability for you to talk and to share about them as well, because it helps the algorithm. It shows it to new people in new areas. Apple says, "Oh, this is a podcast that people are enjoying, that people like to listen to, and we're going to show it to more people that might not have heard of the platform before." So it's a great way to give back to the podcast if you're a listener. So thank you so much. And if you're new here, then yeah, press on it. If you enjoy this podcast, by all means, please do press on the link. And if you are an old timer and you have not done it, then darn tootin', get in there and do it. You owe me one. All right, back to the conversation with Duane Sutter. So let's talk about you. So making the jump. So you get drafted. What was it? You get drafted 17th overall to New York. They were obviously an up-and-coming team that was playing well, on the verge of something great, and you stepped right into that organization and never played an AHL game in your entire career, like spanning, I think, pretty much 10 years, but by the sounds of it. How was that jump for you, and was it one that you expected to make? Like, was that what you thought was in the cards as far as making the Islanders out of camp, or walk me through that whole process?
My first year in Lethbridge, there was no talk during the season of underage players being drafted. It was still strictly a 19-year-old draft, and I had a year that was impressive number-wise, but totally unexpected by myself, and so I was quite surprised. And then it was the year of the merger of the World Hockey and the NHL that summer, and the draft was done in August that year, August the 9th. So at the end of the season in the spring to that date, the leagues merged, and they decided that underage players would be eligible, so that I didn't have all season to fret about it, or even part of the summer. It was just like snap your fingers, and they're drafting your age group too. I got draft. Mr. Torrey called me and said they were going to take me. I that morning, and I said, I really don't want to go to New York, and so on and so on. And I thought one of the brothers were pulling my leg, and they had called and were pretending to be Mr. Torrey. So, anyways, about half an hour later, the phone rang again, and it was Bill Torrey, and I had to apologize for saying what I had to him before, and then training camp came about, and they played me in every game. I think I played all rookie and all NHL games. It was 12, 15 games, something like that. I thought I had quite an impressive camp. I won the rookie training camp award, which was kind of cool. But at the end of the day, they decided that I was not quite big enough, and was maybe go back to junior. And the head scout, Earl Ingerfield, was living right in Lethbridge, so he could keep his eye on me and keep in touch with the team. So they had a poor start. They had a bunch of injuries, and the team had a poor start. So they swung out through here in late November and called me up to play in Edmonton and Winnipeg, I think it was. And then I went back to New York and never really came back. They had injuries, so it was about timing, as you know. You can be a high pick, but it's all about timing and the surroundings and getting the break that you needed. So it was a whirlwind of from August to November, and then I found myself there, and then on we went into the spring and won the Stanley Cup. So it was a really special season.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love so just to rewind. So you get a call at the farm, and somebody says he's Bill Torrey. You get on the phone, you're thinking it's BS, and you're telling there's no way you want to go to New York City.
And excuse me, anyways, then he must have got back to Earl Ingerfield in Lethbridge, and Earl called brother Brian and told him what happened. And Brian called me and gave me shit. And then it was only a few minutes later that Bill Torrey called back and said that they took me with the 17th pick. So it all unfolded quite quickly. I was somewhat embarrassed for thinking it was a prank, but when you grow up with brothers like that, there's usually the odd prank. So it is what it is.
So, okay, so just from the timeline, so you actually told him, I don't want to go to New York. In the meantime, he ends up drafting you and then calls you back.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you had to apologize. So he was
yeah,
not deterred. He wanted you anyways. That's great.
yeah. Well, it was a pretty special year. I mean, Patty Janelle was a old school coach and probably what I needed. My rear end kicked a little bit, but he also made sure that the pressure that he put on you and the experience that he had, you know what, you had to play hard every night or you didn't play, and that's what Dad would have told us as well. So it just turned out to be a pretty remarkable season, and then before you knew it, you were drafted, and then playing that with the Islanders, and then beating the Flyers in the Cup final.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're playing junior. So you have that great year, like you said, an unexpected year, to use your words, the 50 goals season there, playing in Red Deer, and have the high draft pick, which is, coming at you in April. You're probably out camp in September. So like had a month to kind of get ready for it. And you start back in junior, and then you get the call up and you're playing either in Calgary or Edmonton for your first NHL game. With the Islanders, do you remember that first game and what that was like?
I remember getting on a little plane in Lethbridge and flying up to Edmonton the night before, walking into the hotel room, and my first roommate was Lauren Henning. And then just the excitement, and the day went by quicker than I thought it would. The next day went in Edmonton when we were getting ready to play. Mom and Dad had come up to watch, and so that was special. And the reason I was called up was they were short a right winger. Mike Boss was hurt, and I played with Brian Trottier that night and had 2 goals and an assist. So it was a pretty impressive outing. I think we lost 5-3, and I was -2, and I had 3 goals and an assist. So I was on for pretty much every goal. So it started off good, and then the next game, I believe we went into Winnipeg and lined up at a face-off across from Bobby Hull, and he smiled at me, and he was my idol growing up, right? But in Lethbridge, I also played with Bobby Jr. So we crossed paths a few times with Bobby Sr., and so it was pretty neat to line up across the face-off circle from him. So
No kidding.
those are some memories of the first couple of games for sure.
Well, that's wild. I'm so glad I asked. 2 goals and 1 assist in your first game ever in the NHL.
Yeah, right place, right time, and playing with a pretty special player in Brian Trottier. So
You
Trottier
must have
also
thought,
played junior. He was a center, brother Brian's center iceman in Lethbridge in Brian's rookie season.
oh,
So,
okay.
but Trotz got his share of Brian and Brent and I over the years.
Right. That's great. So when you're walking in Edmonton there, is that pre-Gretzky at that year? Like, was he around yet, or
He was there, yeah, yeah,
he was there?
yeah.
So your first game ever against Gretzky, playing with Trottier, that's pretty wild. And then you get to play against your boyhood idol in Hull. I remember my, which you probably didn't know at the time, but my guy was Mario Lemieux growing up, and one of the last games I played with Florida before I got traded there that year, my rookie year at the deadline, was in Pittsburgh against Mario and the Penguins, and that was on my birthday, actually, February 18th. So that's still like a special game for me, because that's such a weird, I don't know what the right word is, but that you're there, right? Like playing with this guy that you've just idolized, like from afar, it seems like, and you're now a peer. It's like a really weird moment, I think.
It's like living it in person, but you've dreamt it many times, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You've been there before
Yeah.
in a dream.
So you're with the Isles, and then you guys go on, and like, what was the feeling there? I mean, you're trying to figure out the league. I mean, you're a young pro, right? Like you're obviously trying to figure it out. You want to be an NHLer. Yet the team has these aspirations outside of you just trying to fit in and earn your own spot. Like what was that year like there, heading up to the first cup?
Well, they had great leadership, obviously, and most of it was from Western Canadian guys. So they were very helpful, along with the Eastern guys like Denny Potvin, and Mike Bossy. as the season went on and I became more familiar with my teammates, it was a very major topic was teams thought they could push us around. And Mr. Torrey made a couple trades, and one of them was bringing Gordy Lane in and myself, and we could both handle ourselves well enough. And then, you had the Nyströms, the Howitts, the Gillies, the Lormers. You had enough other toughness. So round 2, we played Boston, and everybody said if we could prove ourselves coming through there, then we had a good shot to get to the finals. And we could play pretty much any style that was thrown at us. Boston, I think we beat them in 5 games, and it was the famous Gillies and O'Reilly fights 4 or 5 times, and we had 2 or 3 brawls, I believe. So, anyways, at the end of the day, we stood up to them. We won the battle. We won the war. And then we faced another team in Buffalo, a totally opposite type team, a highly skilled team with the French connection. And they had some pretty solid goaltending then as well. And then on the blue line, Jim Schoenfield, guys like that. So we won that series. I can't remember, maybe 6 games. And then we had another physical challenge come ahead of us when we played the Flyers. And we had some internal confidence against the Flyers. Later in the season, we stopped I can't remember the number of games, but they had won 20 some consecutive home games, and we went into the Spectrum and beat them there. So that gave us some confidence, and going into the finals, we knew we could play with them. It was just a matter of how the chips fell, and fortunately they came our way.
Yeah, that's. Do you remember how many games that series went?
That went 6 games. We were talking about it at the reunion last weekend, and Dennis Potvin brought up he scored the first power play overtime game in the history of the NHL. Game 1 in Philly, we got a power play in overtime, and Dennis scored the winning goal. So it kind of we got the jump start winning in their building again, where we were confident, but then it turned out we had to go home and win in 6, and talk around the dressing room was, we got to lay it all on the line tonight, boys, because going back to Philly and having to win a second time in that series in their building in Game 7 might have been a little bit more than we could handle. So
Right.
It was we were all quite ecstatic to win it in Game 6 at home.
There wasn't, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't, like, that was the first time at winning it all, right? There wasn't really playoff success prior to that year and winning the whole thing. Is that accurate?
With the Islanders, or
Yeah, with the Islanders.
well, the previous year they'd won the league regular season, and then the Rangers upset them in playoffs. So again, they had motivation, and they knew what kind of reputation they had outside. So
Right.
the trades that Mr. Torrey made and certainly pushed them over the hump.
Yeah, so Al Arbor on that puck that we had. So we got this 50th anniversary puck that is gold plated or something. The thing weighs like 50 pounds, and it's a memorabilia piece. But on the back, they have a quote on there from Al Arbor. It says, "There is no team with greater character in any sport than this team." I'm sure when he said that, I assume he probably said it after you guys had won 4 in a row. But you were there for all 4. Like, obviously biased, I understand that, and you were a part of it. But, like, can you speak to the character of that team and what the makeup was like there?
You know what? We were a really tight group. Obviously, when you go out on the road, everybody doesn't go the same direction. But when you walked in that dressing room, then you were brothers, and even to take that a little bit different spin on it, Jason, is whenever we'd play teams that you had a brother on, you talked to them the night before, but you didn't talk to them again until after the game, and it was because you were in the dressing room with your brothers, so to speak. And that's the demeanor we had internally with the Islander team. And Mr. Torrey would always make 1 or 2 trades just to tweak it, to keep everybody honest. And there were times when popular players, teammates, went out of the dressing room to add something to get us over the hump for another Stanley Cup run. And at the end of the day, it was just the belief we had in each other and the trust we had in each other. And you knew the guy beside you in the dressing room had your back all the time.
Yeah, that's it's a special feeling, right? I mean, you had that early, obviously in your career, and like that was the only thing that you had experienced at that point. Then you went on and played other places, and you know, I've spoken to that on a personal level, like being around Florida in my rookie year, and what that team felt like after the success they had the previous season, you know, and what that locker room felt like, and then to go to the Los Angeles or to go to Toronto or go to Tampa, Islanders, all when they weren't doing well. Like it was completely kind of a different feel in the room. Like it's something that you can feel at the time. I couldn't really put my finger on what it was, but did you like how do you recreate that? I guess like how do you like when people are talking about culture and now as a coach or as a GM, like how do you get that to happen in a locker room?
I think that the top teams, even in today's league, you see how quite often they'll trade for somebody that's already won a Stanley Cup somewhere to bring some of that feeling into the locker room, and most likely they're going to have success. The most popular one in the last many years was when Colorado took Ray Borkan, right? And Ray Bork, Boston had never been. I think he'd been to the final but never won. So he had the feeling. He also played in a lot of Canada Cups and high end international hockey to play with other players from the NHL who had won before. So that is a good example of bringing a star player in. But quite often it's not a star player coming in. It's a role player that fills the hole and a need that the team needs. And I think in those times that player coming into a new environment is appreciated even more than a star player, because you need a full roster and you got to be deep right through, and guys have to accept their roles, otherwise you're not going to win. And I mean you see that pretty much every year.
Yeah. Well, the trade deadline is such an important piece, I think, for GMs in this day and age, maybe even more so than in years past, because the game itself, it's almost like it's two different seasons, right? Like it's a season. Well, it's always been two different seasons, but there is a team that you need to get to the playoffs, but that's not the same team that you need to win the playoffs oftentimes, right? So yeah, so like to your point, that's why you bring in these more sandpaper guys, these more role player guys, like the guys that are going to be that glue and maybe the bottom six of your team, because you're going to have to play four lines in the playoffs and play with some grit and some nastiness, you know, to probably win those 16 games that are required to win. So I think there is a little more architecture involved, right? Because sometimes you can have this great team that crushes the regular season, but it's not really a playoff team, and managers have a hard time in this day and age to figure that out.
Playoffs are a different game. It doesn't matter. The rules have changed a lot since you and I played, but it is a different game. There's more intensity. I think everybody, even the officials, are more apt to give a little bit and let teams play, let the players settle it on their own, so to speak. But you're right. You might need 10 defensemen at the end of the playoffs. You might need both goalies to step up, and you don't know how many forwards you're going to use. 15, 16 forwards for sure, usually at some point. And it might not be for a lot of minutes. It might only be 5 to 8 minutes a game, but those are critical minutes, as you know. So you need the whole roster. And in today's game, it's a little bit more difficult for the GMs to pull in a star player or whatever because of the cap concerns everybody has. And there's a lot of teams that are really teetering to the cap level right now, right? They're all right there. So you got to move money out to get money in, or have some major injuries that you can slide somebody onto LTI to get you through. And you need some people that understand the math and can control that day-to-day cap situation.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned about being brothers and game day was for game day with your teammates, and you know that you wouldn't talk to the other team. Tortorella is pretty famous, I think, a couple of years ago for one of his quotes about the game's too effing nice. Like guys talking off of face-offs, and guys are joking it up and warm up, and that was definitely, I mean, even more so in your era than maybe mine, but maybe a little bit of both. There's crossover there that, game day was game day, and friends weren't friends on game day. Is there a part of that irks you at all in today's game, that it has gotten to be like that, or do you think it's just a sign of the times and, go with the flow?
It certainly does irk me, and I'm sure it does a lot of old school coaches like Tortorella or Brother Darrell. But like you said, it's a sign of the times, right? Everybody knows everybody, and through social media or whatever it might be, everybody knows everybody, and there's enough players that play in several different organizations. So you make friends, you move on, you make new friends and move on. So I think it's certainly hard to avoid it as a player today, but if I was coaching today, I would hope that come playoff time, there's more direction and focus on your own team, and just staying away from mixing with the opponent.
Right. I remember it just came to me. I was after the trade from you guys. I was in Toronto, and we played in Toronto. Like, it always works out that way, right? Like, so I ended up playing against the Panthers, and I was on the ice for a goal against, I think, is how that happened. And then it was they left me on the ice, and Dave Lowry came up for the draw, and so we were lined up in a way that, like, I was facing our benches, right? And so, Pi, like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something to me that was a joke, or like was, blah blah blah. And so I don't know what I said, but I guess I smiled to him, or when I said something, like, I responded to him, I did something. Anyways, I played my shift. I got back to the bench, and Mike Murphy, who was the head coach in Toronto, just like completely ripped me a new one over like any type of communication, which it wasn't. Anyways, it was just like, that's just the time then, right? Like, you think you're friends with him, you think he's your friend, and anyways, it was nothing to do with any type of conversation about being a friend, but that was sort of the way that was looked at. And now it's like, my gosh, they're yucking it up and warm up, and anyways, I learned pretty quickly to keep your head down and not say anything to anybody there with my experience with Mike Murphy.
In a lot of ways, it's a different game today, but in a lot of ways, it still is the same game.
Yeah. No, good point. What aspects do you think are, like, just with the game itself, I guess, where do you think it's made strides, and where do you think there is that element, or whatever element you're referring to as being the same?
Well, taking the red line out certainly made a change in the speed of the game, and in my opinion made it probably more dangerous for the defenseman going back for pucks. There's a lot of speed created between the blue lines, and the forecheck can be a lot quicker on you. Now, mind you, the icing is different. That rule is different, which is helpful to prevent injuries. The equipment, the skates, the sticks, obviously all that has made the game faster. The fitness games, as players are way more fit than we were, and so in that way, it's changed the game. But I've had guys come up to me and say, well, you guys could never play in today's game. And my answer back to that is, when they changed all these rules, the whole league didn't bring in all brand new players. The current players adjusted, right? They made the change and they adjusted. And so I don't buy what today's players say with, we couldn't play today. And on the flip side of that, when it was a nastier game, when we played, I think a lot of today's players couldn't play years ago.
Right. Yeah.
I think more so that way than us learning to play today's game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the best athlete or the best players at the time, you're still going to be the best players at the time, right? You just adjust to the rules. I don't think that changes, but I do think that there's a way. I've covered that just with what I do now, Duane, with like my high performance mindset coaching. Like the idea, like the funnel is really narrow, is the way I kind of say it. Like, as far as like the personality types that would make it to the NHL, right? There was like a kind of a certain way to do things. Like, there was a real attrition process, right, to get there, that you were weeded out if you couldn't handle A, B, C, or D, right? Like you had to really want what you did, and you had to show up and answer the bell when times called for it. That funnel, I think, is a lot wider now, because like that type of type of fortitude or that type of resiliency or that sort of test, isn't really in the game. So it is allowing kind of definitely it's a more skilled game, but I do think there's a lot more personalities involved in it, which is why I think it's a competitive advantage now as a general manager is to really identify those guys that are willing to do those things, that have that makeup, because I think that there's less guys willing to do things that maybe win championships now.
I think the high end skill is better. Like, for example, maybe your top 2 defensemen, top 6 forwards. I think there's more skill in that group than there was years ago. Like, there might have been, today you might have 6 really high end skilled forwards. Well, in those years, maybe there was only 3. But so I agree from that, in that respect, it's changed some. But you still need a little bit of everything to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, for sure you do. And we'll just look at back in the teams that are winning, right? For sure. Like, there's obviously a lot of talent, a lot of skill on St. Louis and Tampa and Colorado, named the last few, but there's still those guys that know how to get it done in the in the 6 through 9 slot or 12 slot, and plus the defenseman. So yeah, I mean, it's fun. I like having the conversations too. But I mean, even looking back on your team now with the Islanders, I mean, you had, by many account, with Dennis Potvin, one of the top 10 to 15 players to ever play the game. I mean, Mike Bossy has to rank up there as one of the best, if not the best. I mean, but depends on who you talk to, because his career was cut short as far as from a goaltending standpoint. Brian Trottier, one of the all-time best. Like, those guys are obviously going to be just fine playing hockey today, right? But maybe speak to those guys. I guess those would be the big 3 on that team. Maybe there's some other honorable mentions, but like out of those 3 players, the one that most interested to me, just because he was a right shot and he was a scorer, and I didn't see him play very much, was Mike Bossy. Like, what made him so special? And I guess in your mind, like, how special was he?
Well, him and Trotch found a very unique chemistry from the first year of Boss's career, and even in today's game, I don't see what they did. They would come out. Bossy would get a breakout pass from Potvin, and Boss and Trotch could exchange the puck 3, maybe 4 times before they got to the far blue line. So the back checkers were having trouble. The defense keying in on who to take would have a tough time reading it. But they just had a unique chemistry, and Boss in the offensive zone could find the holes to get open, and Trotch found them. And Boss had a sneaky release. He almost cut the puck, and I've said many times, a lot of guys' shots, the puck traveled this way. When Boss shot it, he cut it, and it traveled on end, right? Like, and wow. Like you would see replays and well, where did that puck go? Like, there's no hole there, whether it be 5-hole or somewhere in the top of the net. But the way he cut the puck, it had a different way of traveling through the air, and it found the hole and squeaked its way in sometimes, most of the time.
That's amazing.
Sometimes he beat them clean, so it didn't matter.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but just I think he had, like, he never didn't score 50 goals, right? Like, every year I think that he played, I think he had like so many consecutive 50-goal seasons, and obviously you got to be doing something right. Would you say, like, as far as the next generation of player, would he have been somewhat similar to like a Brett Hull type? Like, was he just like a pure shooter that was really good at finding that open space?
Yeah, that's a good comparable. Yuri Curry came in about the same time and had a lot of success as well. It's the chemistry they find with certain players, and even one of Boss's last seasons that he had remarkable stats. He played that whole year with brother Brent and John Tonelli. So again, he found a way, and it's an attestament to how good of a player he really was. When he came into the league, the Rangers passed on him 3 times in that first round that year before the Islanders got him, and the knock on him was skating, and he couldn't play defensive hockey. Well, he found a way to improve his skating, and maybe a big part of that was how him and Trost moved the puck between each other. Mm-hmm. And the other part was he learned how to play defense because of Al Arbor's coaching. And at the end of the day, it wasn't Nystrom or myself on the ice all the time. When you're protecting a lead, it was basically boss got the chance, and it put the fear of God into some defensemen because they wanted to get rid of the puck, and then he also scored probably 7 to 10 goals in the empty net a year. So he earned exactly everything that he got.
That's awesome. And Dennis Potvin, said to be one of the best defenders of the history of the game, and by some, an undeniable leader of that group. He wore the C there through those cups. Maybe speak about Potvin a little bit.
Denny was a very powerful skater, hard to knock off the puck. Had good separation speed, going back to retrieve pucks, carrying the puck up the ice. Found a way to get it to the net, whether it be the big slapper or just an old school wrist shot. Defending, he is such a powerful guy on his skates, and he loved the hip check, and he took more guys out of the blue line. And if he didn't get them, just missed them. But the word was out around the league, and especially in our division, you better have your head up when you're coming through the neutral zone or entering the offensive zone, because Dennis will get you. And he was an awesome captain. He was, I would say, he was more of a quiet leader than he was a vocal guy. But there's always, in those years, it was Bobby Orr, Dennis Potvin. Well, they were both, as we know, very special players, and you could argue today that Denny was the best, and argue tomorrow Bobby Orr was the best. So regardless, it's still pretty special for them to be mentioned in the same sentence.
Yeah, for sure. Who was he? Was he the one who kept the guys accountable? The accountability is a big word in now, for sure, like coaches and accountability to the players and what the expectations are and the standards. And to me, it always seems like, I'm sure Al Arbor was responsible for that. The head coach definitely has a big role to play, but I think once the head coach leaves the dressing room and they're not in there all the time, the boys have to take care of themselves, and a room that monitors themselves is usually more successful. Was he the one that held the boys accountable?
I think in that dressing room, of the 16 guys that won 4 cups each, I think that we had probably half a dozen guys who could have wore the C in there. Some guys never did. You had Gillies, Tonelli, Trache, Potvin, Nystrom. Like you can keep going like that. Like we had several guys, and I think the guy that probably, I wouldn't say had the most respect, but when he stood up, everybody just kept quiet and listened. And I would say that was Clark Gillies.
That's cool. What made Clark special?
Just, he was a big man, big intimidating guy, and not very often did he stand up and speak, but like I say, when he did, it was meaningful, and everybody took it to heart and paid attention. It wasn't a bunch of BS. It was straight at you, and it was, to this day, he was probably my most favorite teammate.
Oh, that's amazing! Great testament. And we lost him. When did we lose Clark? That wasn't that long ago, right?
It was a year this past Saturday when we were all together. Years today.
Going to take a short break from the podcast to remind you about what Up My Hockey is. For many of you, you just know Up My Hockey as the podcast and of the conversations that I have, which is fantastic. But Up My Hockey is really becoming a bit of a movement. And what do I mean by a movement? Well, the movement is being created because of the overall philosophy about what being your best actually means. And in this day and age, there has been such an incredible focus on on-ice skill development and off-ice physical development, whether it be nutrition or training, that what is left as the biggest competitive advantage for your athlete is personal development, mindset development, mental growth. And that's where the Up My Hockey philosophy comes in, that the holistic development of your player, the person behind your player, is going to give them the greatest advantage in today's marketplace. And you know that the hockey is a marketplace. There are only so many players for so many jobs. And how are you going to stand out? And how are you going to be able to play your best and thrive when the lights are the brightest and the stakes are the greatest? How are you going to be able to keep your confidence high? How are you going to have the self-esteem to push through? How are you going to have the courage and the curiosity to ask the right questions and to stand up for yourself at the right time? How are you going to be able to be the best teammate and be that locker room guy that all coaches and managers want? How are you going to do that authentically and keeping your best interest in heart, yet make a memorable impression on people? And that is the idea behind holistic development. And that is really what my hockey is. So when I'm working with players, whether it be on the ice or whether it be my spring teams or whether it be in my group coaching or whether it be in my peak potential hockey project, that is what I am trying to encourage. I am talking to players about something that they absolutely love, which is the sport of hockey, where they have big dreams and big goals, and I'm giving them the tools to align thoughts, words, and actions with those goals and dreams. And when that trifecta happens, thoughts, words, and actions aligning with goals and dreams on a consistent basis, great things happen. And it also spills out to areas outside of hockey because these skills apply everywhere. So it's a really fun thing to be a part of, this Up My Hockey momentum that is actually happening right now. And I just wanted to remind all of you that there is ways to participate. If you are a hockey parent or a hockey coach or a hockey administrator, Up My Hockey can come to you. What is the focus for the 2023-24 season is to serve academies, schools, associations with a plug and play program that you can provide to your players the support that they need to empower your players to understand the choices they have in the moment that can make them more resilient, more self-aware, more confident in all situations so they can play their best more consistently. If that sounds like something you would like to provide your players, like I said, whether it be an individual team, whether you're a parent of an individual player, or whether you are a president or vice president of an association and you are looking for support for your players that are going to give you the necessary advantage to allow your players to get the support they need, then you have found the right place in Up My Hockey. So reach out to me, www.upmyhockey.com. That's where you find all things Up My Hockey, whether it be my on-ice programs or my off-ice programs, and I would love to have a conversation about how we can support the best interest of your players. Now, back to the episode with Duane Sutter. One name I haven't brought up, but maybe we should, Billy Smith, back because he was with the Islanders back in the day. And when I was with the Islanders, he was there working with my my roommate, Ricky DiPietro at the time. So we heard a lot of stories from Billy, and I got to know him pretty well. Definitely had that childlike, twinkle in his eye when he would tell some stories, and he loved reminiscing, but you could tell that he was fiery and he was a competitor. Was he one of the engines on the back end there? Like he seemed like he had a pretty hot furnace. What was he like to play with during those years?
On a game day, he said nothing and you stayed clear of him. He had a little 6-foot radius out in front of his locker, and you didn't go into there, and he didn't skate very rarely. Did he skate on a pregame skate when he was playing that night? Certainly, he's proven himself as one of the best, if not the best, playoff goalie in history of the league. And but he wasn't always one of the guys that would step up and say something. Like, it was either, like I said before, Nystrom or Trottier or Gillies or Dennis, Tonelli. Like we had a lot of leaders, and even Brent became captain after a while, and Butch Gorian had a lot to say, and myself. So Billy was in the group, but he wasn't front and center, so to speak. We just knew you knew every game he was ready to play. You didn't have to worry about come on, Smitty, let's friggin' go or something like that. It was all he was there, especially come playoff time.
Yeah, he was. He looked like the ultimate competitor back there, as far as seeing competitive juices from a goaltender. I mean, he definitely wore his heart in his sleeve. Looking back on those 4 championships, and now it's hockey lore, really. I mean, like the battles between the Edmonton Oilers and yourselves, and like the stories out of the Edmonton Oiler camp at the first time when they lost to you guys, and what they had to learn from from playing against your group and stuff. Was uh, any of them more memorable, or are you more proud of any of them, or what the toughest battle was in the 4?
You know what, our backs were against the wall many times, but somebody always found a way to come through, whether it be Tonelli or Nystrom or Kenny Morrow was an underrated guy that always seemed to score some overtime goal. There were so many moments that you thought we were done, and then somebody would step up, and it seemed to be a different guy, whether it be who was hot, who was on a roll at the right time, whatever it might be. Certain situations in a game, it wasn't always scoring a goal. It may have been a scrap or taking somebody from the other team out into the penalty box. So there's certainly many, like the overtime goal, Bobby Nyes. We come back one of those cup years, I'm not sure which one it was, from Pittsburgh had us down right into game 7, and they hit the goal. Bullard hit the goal post. We went down and scored the winning goal to advance. The Rangers had us our backs to the wall several times. Capitals did. There's just so many different times that we thought we were done, but somebody found a way to come back. We had somebody watching out for us for 4+ years, and then we knew Edmonton was a new kid on the block. We had beat them twice in previous playoff series, and we knew that with their age and their skill level, that eventually they would be our nemesis, and it turned out they were. But right. The one record, I think, Jason, that will never be broken in any professional sport is we won 4 straight cups. That was 16 playoff series plus 3 more series, 19 consecutive playoff series wins before Edmonton beat us in year 5. So I think that's a record that certainly tells everybody what kind of team we are. It doesn't matter whether we're voted as the number 1 team in NHL history that came out a few years ago or not, but nobody will ever break that record.
Yeah, that's super impressive. What was it like? I mean, I'd probably do this podcast a disservice if I didn't ask you a question about Wayne Gretzky and that team specifically. Just because that was the heyday. That was the Gretzky heyday, right? I mean, and he's considered by pretty much everyone in the world that to be the greatest of all time. Like, what was the game plan against him? 1, and 2, what made him be who he is?
Just a very extraordinary sense for the game. He could think it a step ahead of everybody else. I think all of his skills, like, for example, his skating, a lot of people underrated it. He was sneaky quick and slippery, very hard to line up for a clean check. And then there were other guys there, right? Like he had Messier playing right behind him, and Gary Curry and Paul Coffey, and they had good, solid goaltending. And then they had warriors like Kevin Lowe and Randy Gregg and guys like that. So they were a team that they eventually were going to win, one way or the other. They were going to win. And I think the final thing that got them over the hump is, well, one is we had run into a bunch of playoff injuries, which every team faces, so it was not an excuse. But the other thing is, from the previous 2 years we beat them, they didn't have the grinding type guys that you and I spoke about earlier on the podcast, and they added some 3rd and 4th line guys to give their team some grit, and a couple of guys on the back end, and at the end of the day, that's what made the difference. That's what balanced the playing field, and then the youth took over.
Yeah, that's cool. So, but as far as like Wayne specifically, like obviously you knew that he had to be. Well, I mean, he was the engine, right, of that team, and I mean his playoff success just from a point standpoint was obviously, unmatched as well. Like, what would you like? Did you guys shadow him at all? I don't remember watching those series, but like,
Yeah,
what was the
so I
game
guess I
plan that
didn't
Al put
answer.
at you?
I guess I didn't answer that question. They number one was stay out of the penalty box because their power play was lethal. They had too many horses that could score. Second of all, he loved to the long pass behind your defense, so the defense had to be aware of it. And then one of his favorite plays, setting up behind the offensive team net. Well, you had to try and cut that puck off before it got to him, and then just basically playing a tight defensive zone group of five down low in your end, so they couldn't penetrate. If they were going to score, it had to be from the outside, and then it was up to Smitty.
Right. Easier said than done, right?
That's right. Yeah. It worked for a few series, but after that
Right.
last one, they had her number.
So maybe let's go move on into your coaching career. So was that something that you knew towards the end of your career that you wanted to be involved in the game still and get behind the bench?
When I retired in Chicago, Bob Pulford had offered me an opportunity to go into the farm team and be the head coach in Indianapolis, or to go home to Viking and do some amateur scouting for the team. And at the time, our parents were getting older, and it was a good thing that we did go home. My wife lost her dad the next year, so it was a special time for us to go back there. I learned the scouting field for 2 years and decided that I wanted to get into coaching. Went into Medicine Hat for half a season, and then went into Indianapolis. That job opened up again that had been offered to me 3 years prior to that. So went down there and just slowly ground it out, and eventually ended up in Florida where you and I crossed paths. And then I got the opportunity to be head coach when Terry Murray and his staff were let go. But that was, at the time, I didn't feel I was ready for it. But when you're offered to be a head coach of a National Hockey League team, you're not going to turn it down, right? So I went in there and at Christmas time, and we had some success for the remainder of that season. I signed a contract with Bill Torrey to be the coach for 2 more years after that. In the springtime, in July, ownership changed, and a guy named Alan Cohen bought the team and came in. Well, he'd grown up in New York City, sitting in MSG. Obviously, they won the cup in '94, so right away he was talking about Mike Keenan in the media and everything. And Mike was living in South Florida at the time, so I didn't feel comfortable from day one at training camp. I just thought that you know what, you had to be a really outstanding team to carry on. So it was a little bit like the Boudreaux situation that a lot of the hockey world is familiar with now,
Mm-hmm.
where you knew somebody was hanging over your shoulder. And so I lasted until U.S. Thanksgiving that year, and that was it. But again, I didn't feel I was 100% prepared for it, but you're not going to turn an opportunity down like that. So
Sure.
At the end of the day, you know what, it's a stressful job. You're dealing with a lot of different athletes, different types of people. So you know what, it probably wasn't for me.
Right. What about that experience there? Like when we crossed paths there, me and my rookie year, that was after that cup run. Like maybe speak to that team and that experience there, and being with Doug McLean, Lindy Ruff was part of the staff there. It was a uh, pretty good coaching group for sure, and a kind of a special group of players. I mean, a bunch of kind of journeymen at that point. They were the original sort of, cast-offs isn't the right word, but they were taking the expansion draft. They kind of had this a new opportunity to do something great, and the personalities in that locker room were pretty special too. Maybe you can speak to that team a little bit.
The character was awesome, and personalities also. The Scrudlins of the world, the Mellenbys, and you can go right all the way down the line. And then you had some other players that weren't as well known, like Robert Svela.
God, he was good. Hey,
they drafted yourself, Radek Dvorak, Eddie Jovanovski, Rob Niedermeyer, quality players with a lot of potential, right? So it was, some of them had to take on a different role than what they would have in a more established team, but they thrived on it, right? And we could play any one of the four lines against the top lines in around the league. Like the year we went to the final, we beat Pittsburgh with Mario and Yager. We beat the Flyers with Lendros's big line. So at the end of the day, we could play anybody against anybody and have success, but we had to play in groups of five, and the guys really were focused on attention to detail. So it gave us short-term success, and then I think the organization lost their direction a little bit once they brought in Pavel Bure and they couldn't keep together the core of the character guys. It changed and changed a little bit too quickly for my liking, but it should have gave younger guys opportunity to play, but then they realized that like in your situation, Jason, they realized that they were lacking character again. So that along came your trade for Kirk Muller. So
Right.
he won a Stanley Cup and so on. And he was an older player, but that's really how that trade came to fruition. It was, they felt they were lacking some leadership, and they had some good young talent like yourself, David Nemorowski, for example, coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was, I mean, you talked about the new ownership coming in, and I've spoken to it on the podcast a little bit before, but the Leafs was who was supposed to, like, Cliff Fletcher told me at my draft that he was going to take me with their first round selection that year, and then like the next day he didn't, and anyways, it was extenuating circumstances, which he told her there's a death in his scouting staff, and that guy's guy was Eric Fichaud, so they ended up taking Eric Fichaud kind of in memorandum of this gentleman. But anyway, so Toronto, meaning Cliff, kind of ended up getting their guy, right? So like, would have been a great opportunity for me. I was there for those last 9 games or 10 games, and then they got fired, right? And then Neil Smith comes in, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but holy smokes, did that change the trajectory for me? Like, I just was not a part of the mix, like, for whatever reason. I mean, you'll never really know why, but Neil Smith had wanted nothing to do with me, even regardless of like the ridiculous success I was having in the AHL, and that they weren't in the playoff run. So it's kind of interesting. You mentioned opportunity earlier, right? Like, what could have been a great opportunity turned out not to be a great opportunity, kind of be the exact opposite. And sometimes you just feel like you're spinning your tires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? Like I've lived it the last few years too with my son Brody. He played 12 NHL games, but when there was opportunity with injury to go up maybe for an extended period of time, he was injured in the minors. Happened twice, and I mean for different reasons, right? So it's opportunity and timing and all that, and for your podcast viewers, I can honestly say that Jason Podolin was an NHL player that did not get that genuine opportunity. So it sucks, and it sucks for a lot of young guys, and unfortunately that's just the way it's been forever. And
Right.
all I can say is I feel bad for yourself. I feel bad for my son, and there's many other young players like that with opportunity would have made it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate. I mean, thank you for that, and for everyone listening. Duane took the time to tell my son in the hotel lobby that I was a special player and he should be proud of me, and that was really gracious of you, and thanks for doing that in front of my son. But yeah, it's interesting, right? When you look back on our own journeys. I mean, you obviously have the perspective of yours, and me with myself, but it would have been interesting. That was such a shock, that trade, to me. Like, no idea that was coming, right? And I kind of thought I was going to retire a Florida Panther in 10 years. Like, that's what I thought. And it would have been interesting to stay with that group, because it was a cool group, and I thought that even the way I was used, like, it wasn't. I wasn't on the power play necessarily or playing top line minutes, but I mean, that was just the process, right? I mean, like, you guys were very open with that. Like, you were happy with how things were going. It wasn't like anyone was upset with me or my output. It was just, do the job that you were asked to do. And I thought I was doing it, and that was the trajectory, right? But it would have been neat to stay a part of that development system there.
99% of the time when you get traded, it's because also the team has seen something in the past that they loved. And you said that a few minutes ago that the Maple Leafs were a team that certainly showed interest to you that previous summer.
Mm-hmm. What are those discussions like? I mean, I've never actually even thought of this before. Like, did you know? Like, would like the GM, would he come in and ask the coaching staff, like, whatever, Toronto wants A, B, and C? Is there anything you guys have to say about it, or do you ever go to bat for players, or is that just something that comes down to the desk and somebody's gone and somebody else is coming in?
I think when that trade come down, we were in Montreal, and we were at practice, and Brian Murray came into the coach's room, and obviously Doug and him had some conversation of it earlier that morning, and he said, "This is what's happening." Lenny and I were sitting there, obviously in the same room, but you're not the ones that are going to give the answer, right? You trust your scouts, and you trust what the manager's saying. So they just felt they needed some different leadership, and you were the ask. There was a couple other names that came up. I'm not quite sure. I think one may have been David Nemorowski at the time. But obviously Toronto, you were the player Toronto wanted, and that's how
Right.
it came down.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, in defense of, I mean, Brian Murray, I mean, not for me, but I mean, that did make your team better in the moment, of course, right? I mean, here's a veteran guy that's playing bigger minutes. I mean, like, as a coaching staff, I'm sure, and the players as well. I mean, we're excited to do that. You want to see GMs making moves to make you better. So I mean, that happens all the time. It's just it was such a different game back then. Like, I don't even think I knew that it was the trade deadline, to be honest. Like, when it happened, like, I didn't even, nor did I think that I would be a part of it. But with you though, and the coach, and you said, like, maybe it wasn't for you or whatever. Like, and some people are great head coaches and maybe not great assistant coaches, and some people are born to be assistant coaches and not meant to be head coaches. When you did transfer from the assistant coach role to the head coaching role, what were, like, as far as from the roles and responsibilities, like, what did you feel comfortable with? What wasn't just quite as comfortable for you, or where do you feel your strengths were?
I think my strengths was certainly trying to get to know each individual and what made them tick, right? And there were long hours. Like, you go in the rink early in the morning and cut some video or do some homework on previous game, or maybe what you had to get done in practice, what you wanted the players to get out of it. Um, it it was different as a head coach because I wanted my staff to, once the players started trickling into the dressing room, I wanted my staff to do the final preparations for a video session or whatever it might be. Well, I went out and tried to mix with them while they were having coffee or in the dressing room, or maybe they're riding a bike or something like that in the training room, where I wanted to get in there and just get a vibe for what the team was thinking, and get to know them better as individuals. And that was my objective. Unfortunately, at the time, the other end of the bargain wasn't getting held up back in the assistant coaching room. So then I was quite overwhelmed with all of it. Would I do it again today? Well, the opportunity is not going to come again, but I'm finding more enjoyment out of being a mentor for different coaching staffs. I was in Budapest, Hungary last year doing it, and I'm doing it with 2 or 3 teams in the local area here now this year. So it's a direction that certainly I felt terrible at the time that I failed. More because of, you had your family at home, and the kids were young, and you had to make them understand the logic of it all. But at the end of the day, I still think I could be a good assistant coach, and I believe that when I was in that role, I was a really good assistant coach.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I testament to that too. I mean, I thought, I mean, well, Lindy obviously went on to, maybe, and still in the middle of a crazy successful coaching career. But as far as the coaching staff in Florida was very memorable. Like the the impact that you and Lindy had, especially with the young guys, I think was great. And that's really probably where most of the importance really lies. I shouldn't say most of the importance, but like us young guys trying to figure it out, right? You know what I mean? Like you need help, right? You need guys that want to care about you and want to invest in you. And you guys definitely did that. I remember that for sure.
And the coaching staffs are bigger today now, Jason, too, right? And more, each one has more of a special role within the organization. And that coaching staff in Florida with Doug and Lenny and I, it's kind of what I said earlier, where Doug handles the main focus of day to day, but we also knew the meat and potatoes of the franchise going forward were your younger guys, and so that's who we not had to spend time with. That's who we made it number one priority, is spend time with you guys.
When I just looked at that team that you coach, and you mentioned Pavel Bure, who is, I remember watching him in Vancouver. I mean, he was electric in a lot of ways, and he had his good seasons in Florida as well. I don't know him as a player at all, nor have I talked to anyone who played with him, so I don't know anything about his character, what his personality was like. But that in that 2000-2001 year, he had 59 goals and he had 92 points, and second place on your team had 37 points. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen a discrepancy like that before. Like, how did that come about? That he, I know that he was good, but it's just so strange that there was no one else there with him at all.
Well, it was certainly from a lack of depth and injuries, right? You had to play him, give him a lot of ice time for exactly that reason. There was nobody else with even close to him as with numbers, so you had to give him the ice time. Pavel was he was a good team player in a lot of ways, but he didn't spend a lot of time with his teammates. I think that's a fair way of saying it. And there were days when his effort in practice wasn't where it had to be, and it didn't make his teammates very happy. So there were times when I told the guys, just leave it be. I'll look after it. They were ready to try and look after the situation by themselves in a way that probably nobody wanted it to happen. So,
right.
But with that said, I couldn't take ice time away because you didn't have a chance to win a lot of hockey games then, and that's just the way it was, and you had to accept it that way.
Right. Yeah, isn't that so? You had that. I mean, that battle is a big battle. Like when your best player maybe isn't your best locker room guy, right? Like that's a tough one, because you need that group there. And that's why I think like the Sidney Crosbys are so special. And again, I don't know Sidney Crosby at all, but it's pretty hard to find a guy that says anything bad about Sidney Crosby, as a leader or his dedication or anything else. So like, when you have those guys that are also your hardest working players in practice or in games, like now there's the example, right? And when there's two different sets of rules and it's very obvious, it's hard to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, and you're right. Like it was a day-to-day difficult situation that I had to try and find a balance for, because you had to have 18 skaters playing for you, playing hard for you, but then when there was that big of a discrepancy in point and goal totals, that you had to play them, and I think at the end of it all, Pavel and Mike were talking behind the scenes, and that was the final straw for me.
Right. Hey, as a hockey dad, maybe we'll switch gears. So you mentioned your son who's played, he's over in Europe now playing. He's in the middle of his pro journey, and you're obviously probably not as involved as you were at the younger ages. But what was it like being a hockey dad through the minor hockey ages? Him getting drafted, trying to cut his teeth in the NHL. What was your role there, and what type of advice were you giving him?
Well, when I got fired as head coach in Florida, my wife convinced me to help coach his team, as well as our two daughters' hockey teams. So that was a great experience. Days that I wouldn't trade in for anything. In South Florida, we had a lot better program than people would think. We went to the Nationals 2 years in a row with his team. in the U.S., there's 12 teams that go to the nationals, and we were able to accomplish that twice. So that was a big thrill. He's just finished his 10th year pro and has retired. He's trying to find his way in the officiating way. But he played his last 4 years in Europe. He played 12 NHL games in the previous 6 years, which the numbers were always against him. He never was a top kid, but he went through a huge growth spurt. And when he finally got his balance and coordination caught up to him, then he got ample opportunity. Again, never quite made it because of the right place, right time thing that we've already spoke about. So you know what, he leaned on me. The kids did lean on me a lot for information. I tried to support them, and I tried to treat you guys in a very similar way as if you were my kids, where there were times you needed an arm around your shoulders, and there was that time you needed a kick in the ass. And that's how I tried to treat you guys in player development and as a coach. But that's how I tried to treat our own children. I'd watch a game and ask him what he thought, how he played, this and that, and then give him a little insight and maybe a different angle to, I wouldn't say pacify him, but to try and lead him in the right direction. And like I said, much like you, the opportunity just didn't present itself in the right time. And so now he's back in Calgary here, living close to us, and is married and has a nice little girl, 1.5 years old, and they're expecting again. So it's special to have them all close by, and your children are younger, but eventually you're going to see them and take a lot of pride in how they develop and how they grow up into young adults and attempting to find their own career.
Yeah, it's tons of fun. I mean, and that is one thing that I'm doing, even with my platform and what Up My Hockey is from a philosophical standpoint. And I really believe that hockey can be the best gateway to manhood, or to womanhood, like to be a great person. And I think, all those that you talked about, your son maybe growing late. I'm sure there is, like, maybe we can talk about that. Like, there's probably some adversity and some hurdles that he had to get through and overcome, to maintain his focus on the goals that he had. And there's just so much wound up into a team sport. And I mean, obviously hockey is our sport, but I really do love the aspect of it being team, and the dynamics of the interpersonal and how you show up when things aren't going well for you, and all these things that I think really help in the upbringing, right, of our young men and women. And not everyone's going to play in the NHL, of course, but I'm sure Brody's that's your son's name, right, Brody?
Yeah.
I'm sure Brody's a better man because of his involvement in the sport.
Well, there were some battles. I know a lot of scouts and hockey people wanted him to be this similar type player as I was, but because he was 5'7", 120 pounds when he was playing bantam hockey, and we went to Saskatoon Blades camp as an unlisted player, and he had a really good camp, and they wanted to sign him. And I remember Lauren Mulliken saying to me, he was the coach manager, said, promise. He looked at my wife and said, promise us he's going to grow. Well, he went from 5'7" to 6'4.5".
Oh, wow.
And so it took him a while to get it. But when he was smaller, he had to play more of a cerebral game and think his way through it, right? So he was not a physical guy. He did not avoid one-on-one puck battles and trench work, but at the end of the day, he never became a really physical player. He was more of a cerebral player, and I think a lot of hockey people had a different perspective of him than what he really was. And it probably cost him. The coach of the Hurricanes right now was not a fan of him, and we all know how Rod Brendamore played and not what kind of player he was. They weren't the same. They weren't the same type of player. So unfortunately, that's how it came down. But he is. I take great pride in when I work with young kids and working with him and our girls, that you try and give them information and lead them along the path that'll teach them good life skills. And if you're in any business or any direction, any path you go in life, you need leadership, and you need to be a good person. And I think all three of the kids have those qualities.
That's awesome. Well, Duane, I think we'll wrap it up. I really appreciate your time, and for episode 100 to speak with one of my old coaches and to speak with the 4-time Cup champ on one of the greatest teams to ever play has been an honor. So thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with us.
That's pretty cool. It'd be the century podcast. So thank you, Jason. It's great to cross paths with you again, and please keep in touch.
We will, for sure. Thanks so much, Doug.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for staying till the end. 100 episodes in the bank. I was trying to do the math on that. Like, goodness gracious, my episodes, almost none of them have been under an hour. Most of them are over an hour and a half. So an hour and a half, 150 hours of content. That's a lot of talking. My gosh. And for those of you who know me quite well or on a personal level, like I'm not somebody that controls a conversation or wants to talk a lot. I'm quite an introvert. I'm in my house the vast majority of the time, by myself, thinking, reading, writing, doing whatever it is that us introverts like to do. But this podcast has been such an amazing outlet for me to have conversations that inspire me. And hopefully the conversations that inspire me are also inspiring you. They really seem to honestly nourish me and feed me. And one of the common tendencies for introverts is to forget how much contact with other people actually means to us. We can kind of get lost in our own thoughts and stuck away in our caves. But this platform and this reason to get in touch with people, to reach out and to have conversations and to ask questions and to share thoughts that actually matter has meant the world to me. And by the comments that I'm getting and the reviews that are coming in, it is really making an impact for some of you as well. So I am truly grateful for everyone who wants to be here, who chooses to be here, especially for those of you who choose to listen to the end. Very grateful for your support. Grateful that you are inspiring me to continue on this, something that nourishes me and feeds me and allows me to grow along with you. So to all of you who have been here from 1 to 100, my goodness, you should earn a prize. I wish I knew how to know if that's actually happened, if there's any of you that have listened to all 100 episodes. And to celebrate you. If you have and you're still here, my goodness, let me know that you've listened to all 100. I would love to do a shout out to you to recognize your longevity and your commitment to the show. That would be a super cool thing to discuss. And if you have, like I said earlier at the beginning, I plan to do a reflection on my top episodes in the first 100, which is going to be super hard because all my guests were so amazing. But I think it would be a fun exploration. And so if you have listened to all of them and you would like to share that with me and also share which ones have been your favorites, I would absolutely love to know that. So by all means, share that with me. You can reach me at jason@upmyhockey.com or you can reach out in my contact form on my website, www.upmyhockey.com. I would love to hear from you. So thanks again for being here. Duane, if you're still listening, or anyone who's close to Duane, my goodness, what an amazing conversation that was. Super grateful that he was able to spend time with us. And how can anyone get tired of the Sutter story? From the foundation of hard work and being farm tough and boys battling in the farm and jumping hay bales in the field for plyometrics and I just love everything about it. I mean, I love the rawness of it, the authenticity of it, and just a little bit of the traditionalism of it, and how we've kind of gotten away into this specialized 12-month-a-year, 24-hour-a-day type approach to hockey that I believe we need to be taking a step back from. I still believe in the multi-sport athlete. I still believe that you need time away from skates. I truly believe that for not only for younger players, but I also believe that for older players. I believe our brains need it. I believe our bodies need it. I believe our souls need it. But to know that the Sutter boys from Viking, Alberta were putting the skates away and doing their chores in the farm and working on the person behind the hockey player. You won't meet somebody that'll tell you that a Sutter wasn't a great teammate to them when they played with them, and I think that's a testament to their upbringing, obviously from mom and dad, and from also what they were expected to do and the responsibility of their day-to-day lives and what they were accountable to be, and being a part of a group, a little team of their own there of the 7 boys on the farm. You learn to be a teammate real quick. So I think there's so many lessons there from the about the Sutters and about their name and what how successful they've been, not only on the ice but off the ice. So couldn't think of a better guest to have on for episode 100. So thank you so much again for being here, and until next time, play hard and keep your head up.